Okay, Dad, there's a lot of talk about. Let's start with the Moscow terrorist attack. So, 3 days ago, we did a podcast and we went over who we thought could be behind it. We went over ISIS or ISIS K, Ukraine, CIA. Since then, have you any new developments? Has your position changed? Who do you think is behind this?
No, I think it's okay. There's still a lot of unknowns, and we can't point with any certainty as to who is ultimately responsible, or who may have hatched this plot. But the picture is coming into focus. It's becoming sharper. Uh, yeah, there's certain details have emerged. Just to give one example, last time I mentioned that I'd heard that they had followed the car, and while these people were driving, they were determining who they were calling, and that it was actually through that they were able to pick up these other people, who were part of the support network, so very quickly. I was at the time I wasn't sure how it was done. I don't know if the technology exists that if you're simply following a car, you can somehow intercept calls and determine what the number of the receiving party. Maybe that technology exists, but it turns out it was simpler than that. That one of the perpetrators left apparently a cell phone on scene, and they picked it up, and from that they found these numbers, and so they knew which lines. I know they're not actually lines right now, but which numbers to tap, and that way they were able to determine very quickly, who was supporting them, who had helped prepare this plot, this terrible act. I've also heard, just from one source, actually Scott Ritter, that some of these calls were made into Ukraine. Now, again, I haven't heard that from anybody else, so we'll just say that's at this case that's tentative. It's uncertain information, but that may explain why Putin said that there was preliminary information that suggested that a window was opening at the Ukraine border.
Right.
How would they know? Well, maybe because these people were calling into Ukraine to their contacts there.
So so Putin, the day or after the attack, or 2 days after, what did he say exactly? He said pretty definitively, he didn't make it much wiggle room. He said that there was a window open for these people to get across Ukraine, right?
Right. They had, according to their information, according to preliminary information, I think those are the exact words that were used, or the translation anyway. That a window was being opened in Ukraine, to allow them to cross the border. And then if this information that I heard from Scott Ritter is correct, again, it would be connected to the phone calls that were being made by the perpetrators from the fleeing car. So that's one thing. That's okay. Again, we've got more detail on that aspect of the case. But then it's also, we've learned more about what was happening on March 8th. If you remember, there was the warning that the U.S. Embassy, the U.S. government gave to all American citizens in Moscow to stay away from mass gatherings, and they specifically mentioned concerts. Mm-hmm.
Which is the only thing they mentioned, actually, specifically.
Yeah,
Nothing else. They said, to avoid concerts. Yeah. Very specific.
Right. Well, it turns out that on that on March 8th, there was going to be a concert that weekend by a very well-known, singer and a patriotic singer in Russia, and this event was held. Nothing was happened, but again, we have a picture of one of the terrorists taken on that day, so he was there. But no attack, of course, occurred. And it turns out that actually security was high. That maybe there was some concern that this person could be a target of some kind of terrorist attack. But security was high. They could see armed guards apparently, and that's one theory is that they were going to do it on that day. It would make sense for two reasons. One, again, he's a patriotic singer in Russia. very well known, I guess better known than Picnic, whatever that rock band was.
So it'd be a blow to kind of it's a simple symbolic attack,
Right.
almost like this is a national singer maybe doing a rendition of the Russian national anthem, and then
Right. So there's that. But then also, you got to remember that this was before the election. Okay, the election was held approximately a week after that concert. And of course, this is a time where the attacks were taking place in Belgorod, where Ukraine was clearly doing what it could to disrupt the election, to maybe create doubt about Vladimir Putin's qualifications, his competency, to rule Russia. If this had occurred a week before, I strongly doubt that it would have reduced support for Putin. It probably would have increased it. But the way, some people think or theorize on the other side, let's say the Ukrainians, that maybe if we can create chaos in Russia, this will cause the Russian people to sour on Putin. So it was very much, so again, that's very, very suggestive. The fact that this was, to all appearances, was going to take place on approximately March 8th, before the election, just less than a week before the election, at a patriotic event. That again, I think, forces us not to look towards ISIS or ISIS-K in this case, but to really look towards Ukraine. Because this is obviously would fit in with Ukraine's. It seemed to be overall strategy of trying to disrupt the elections.
Mm. You said there were two things, right?
Right. Well, okay. Well, there are two things about it. First, it was a patriotic event, and second, it was right before the election.
Okay,
so really, both of these causes this. Again, does not prove, but both are suggestive of Ukrainian involvement. I think you just have to say that. It's just obvious. Mm. So these are some of the details that have come out. And then another thing I find very interesting is that if you recall, it was that shortly before, and it was Victoria Nuland resigned. And this was Victoria Nuland who, not long before she resigned, was in Kiev. And it was really just before she departed from Kiev, said in some sort of in an interview that took place, I believe maybe it was out on the streets, that there were nasty surprises in store for Russia. Mm. That was March 5th.
Right.
And again, this could be coincident. She might not have known exactly what was going to happen.
But it begs you the question.
Yeah, right. It certainly makes you wonder, that the U.S. government had enough knowledge to issue this warning, and that Victoria Nuland said this just 3 days before it was supposed to take place. It makes you wonder, how much it certainly strongly suggests, again, does not prove, but strongly suggests that she and other people in the U.S. government had foreknowledge of some kind of terrorist attack.
Right. There's some more things I want to go over that are pretty damning in my opinion. One is that within an hour, just pretty much minutes, I think 55 minutes after the attack was reported in Moscow, this means before the gunmen were apprehended, before the fires were put out, really before anybody should know anything.
Right.
The United States said definitively that this is ISIS-K. Ukraine has nothing to do with it. How that doesn't make any sense. How could the United States know? It's also so amateur to think about. It's like, first, nobody's asking the United States to give a statement right away, but immediately within minutes after the attack, they said, "Oh no, this has nothing to do with Ukraine. This is ISIS-K." So then it begged immediately. The first question comes to mind, said like, "Well, if you knew it was ISIS-K, did you know about this? And if so, why didn't you let the Russian authorities know?
Right.
Why did you let the attack carry out? And how can you say with any certainty, that this is not Ukraine, and unless, of course, you knew exactly who was behind it and then allowed it to happen?" Right. So what are your thoughts about that? The idea that the U.S. can make this statement so quickly?
Yeah, well, it's patently absurd. I mean, there's no way, unless, they knew everything about the plot ahead of time. They knew it was going to happen at that time.
Which just makes them complicit.
Right. So it's obviously, yeah, it seems to be clearly, just an effort to protect their proxy, Ukraine. I mean, I think there's really no other way to look at it, and maybe also to direct people's gaze away from possible U.S. involvement in the attack. I mean, again, it may be that, it suggests panic because, like you say, it just seems like a very amateur thing to do. It's like, no, I was nowhere near that, before it's even
right. You think, I figured we would be better at lying. Yeah. I'm actually pretty astounded, how amateur we are at this.
Right. Well, the thing is, I guess, again, it's just like within the West, this very amateurish lying, as you call it, it works simply because we have a very compliant media. So, what you've seen, like since this attack took place, there are editorials, in like every major leading newspaper in the U.S. and U.K. and other Western countries, all saying the same thing. Ukraine had nothing to do with this. Yeah, it's absurd that Russia would point to Ukraine. There's no evidence, but clearly there is evidence. They don't even mention the fact that, again, these people were fleeing towards the Ukrainian border. That's not proof, but it is evidence. Let's be honest. That's obviously evidence. And you say, well, okay, we dispute this evidence. You could say that, but it's just that there's no evidence is patently false. The Russians have put it forth, and from my understanding, it's like the videos that were taken there have been geolocated. Clearly, they were on a road that was heading towards Ukraine, and it was after they passed through a city where they could have, let's say, headed towards Belarus or in another direction, but they turned south. And we're heading towards Ukraine.
And then the fact that Putin said that there was a window open. Right. From what we've seen, Putin is usually very careful with his words.
Right.
So he seems to be pretty sure of himself when he's saying that, it sounds.
Right.
And another thing that I don't know if you've seen, but I just heard this morning, which seems crazy, and I heard it from Alistair Crook, who is a very distinguished ex-senior diplomat from the UK. He was talking about Alexei Danilov. I don't know, this is the head of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. At least he was until yesterday. Right. But the day after the attack, and I watched this video this morning, Alexei Danilov was on Ukrainian television the day after the attack, and I wrote it down just so you can hear it word for word. He said, "Is it fun in Moscow today? I think it's a lot of fun. I would like to believe that we will arrange such fun for them more often. After all, they are brotherly people, and we need to please our relatives more often, so we will go." That sounds pretty damning to me. And then what's even crazier is the day after this, he was fired.
Right.
It's Does it get much clearer?
Right. Well, I mean, you could. I think it does again just kind of strengthen the case that Ukraine, and particularly Ukrainian intelligence, was very much behind this. Again, it falls short of proof, but it's another piece in the puzzle, and it's
Well, why would they fire him as well?
Yeah, you could, you could say, like in a civilized country, you would fire somebody for just saying something like that, right? But Ukraine is not a civilized country. I mean, unfortunately, these kind of comments are being made all the time. Even, I can remember it was years ago that Poroshenko, bragged about the fact that they were shelling Donetsk city and causing, the children there to hide in the basements. I mean, it's just horrible, horrible things that these political leaders say, and that, it should give pause to humanitarian-minded people in the West, but either they don't hear about it, or when they hear about it, they just choose not to notice. So anyway, you could say, well, okay, this was just too outrageous, or we need to get rid of him. But another possibility is that, okay, Zelensky is simply terrified that he doesn't want to be blamed. He doesn't want to be. The Russians have obviously have made no effort to kill Zelensky. But if it turns out that he's involved in this, I think that policy would change, and that he would just. Putin made it clear that they're going to hunt down everybody who was involved and execute justice, which means death in this case. So if Zelensky was involved, yeah, he would have become an obvious target. So then maybe this is an effort to put some distance between himself and the plot. Say like, but at the same time, you say, okay, I didn't do it, but it suggests that, okay, you're admitting or suggesting, okay, that strongly that this person was involved in it. And just the fact that he celebrated like that, I mean, it's sort of like a touchdown dance. It sounded like, this is obviously somebody capable of doing something like that. He thought it was fun, right? You're already suspecting the Ukrainians, he does this. This is just...
Once again, it's like Victoria Nuland saying nasty surprises, and then Alexei Danilov making these comments, we can go back further to where Joe Biden was saying that he will end Nord Stream 2.
Right. We can do it.
It seems like we're just so open about it,
right,
in a way that it's kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's one thing. It's very unprofessional. I mean, it just simply it shows a lack of discipline, if nothing else. Okay, maybe you hatched this evil plot, you executed it, but clearly you tried to achieve deniability, right? But you just can't help yourself, right? You have to celebrate, and maybe that's again why Zelensky saw this as a kind of a breach of security. You say, okay, yeah, we did this, but you're not supposed to get on TV and do a victory dance. So he's got to go.
Right. So, okay. So if this was Ukraine, and it seems like the evidence is piling up more and more pointing towards Ukraine, and I think we'll find out more in the coming days, because still hasn't been any official accusations coming from Russia yet.
Yeah, they've fallen short of that, but nothing official.
Right.
They say they've made it clear that they're looking at Ukraine, and it appears that Ukraine was behind it.
Right, to some extent, or largely behind it.
I guess,
and this ISIS-K was kind of a cover. Something else I heard is that these people were recruited in Tajikistan. The Ukrainian embassy in Tajikistan, the ambassador there is the former head of intelligence of Ukrainian intelligence.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. Yeah.
So, there are all these little dots that are being drawn together. None of them prove anything definitively by themselves, but as they start to add up, it's becoming harder and harder to say that Ukraine maybe was not involved. Which brings me to the next question, is that if Ukraine was involved with their intelligence community, which is their intelligence department is called the GRU, which was essentially established by the CIA and MI6. It was built from the ground up, from my understanding, in 2014. Mm-hmm. So basically, if we're saying that the GRU or Ukraine is behind this, then that means the US and the UK were involved or had knowledge of it to some extent, probably, right?
Right. Yeah, I think at least had knowledge of it.
And even possibly involved in planning it even.
Yeah, you have to see, because they're very tight with that intelligence agency. That's not really a secret.
Right.
As you're saying, they built it up from the ground.
We put these intelligence people in power. We trained them. We gave them all the equipment. We helped them strategize. And like you said before, there was a New York Times article that came out. What was it, a year ago or so?
There was one
that was saying that that they were worried that the GRU, the Ukrainian intelligence, is acting a little bit too.
Well, there's been more than one article that has made, let's say, carried that same message. I think there was one about a year ago, but there was also one much more recently, just a few weeks ago, in which they again, the secret sources, the CIA sources talking to the New York Times reporter, again expressed frustration at the unauthorized actions carried out by Ukrainian intelligence. There was, those are clear efforts to try to put some distance between themselves and Ukraine. And, it may be that it's true. They truly are kind of frustrated and worried and alarmed by some of the things the Ukrainians do. But they clearly are not doing anything to stop these. And they really do have the power. The U.S. has. You can say Ukraine is really just ultimately entirely dependent on the U.S. government. And if the U.S. government, one day says, "Okay, we're pulling the plug. This is over.
Right.
Yeah, no more weapons, no more dollars. It's over, right?" And they can stop it, but they don't. So, it's a bunch of hand wringing. Maybe it's real hand wringing. They are kind of disturbed and worried about this, or maybe it's just a show. It's just to say, "Okay, we did this, but we got to achieve some kind of deniability." That's a real question.
So I guess my next question is would this be considered an act of war if?
Oh yeah, certainly would be.
An act of war from the United States and the collective West,
right.
NATO.
Well, yeah, it's kind of if in fact we're involved in the planning, it clearly is an act of war. It would be an act of war committed by the U.S. against Russia.
If we knew
right.
about it and didn't do anything to stop it, is that
right.
also how would the Russians view this? Obviously, the Russians are very upset, have to be very upset, and you have to try to empathize, even if people hate Russia, hate Putin.
Right.
You just have to try to put yourself in their shoes.
Right.
I mean, just think about it if we were here in America and Russia overthrew the Canadian government in 2014 and installed an anti-American government and started arming the crap out of them and putting everything on the border and saying that people can't speak English, they got to speak Quebecois or whatever. And
right.
Like how insane that would be, and we wouldn't put up for it. And then then a terrorist attack happened in New York City that seemed to be somehow from Canada linked to the Russians.
Right.
We would have blown the world up a long time ago.
Right. Well, essentially, that the anger in Russia is real, and again, I think we should. It's funny how we're always demonizing Vladimir Putin, President Putin. Somehow he's solely responsible for everything. That he's the kind of a mad leader, that's leading Russia down this reckless path. The truth is that Putin is cautious. He's moderate. If anything, if he was replaced, it would be by somebody who's probably more hot-headed and more nationalistic. And there are cries, throughout Russia to, just start bombing the crap out of the Ukrainians. Now, I don't think Putin's going to do that. And he does not want to go to war with the U.S. But if in fact the U.S. was involved at some level, even if it was just passive, meaning that they were aware of it, and
right, what does that mean?
Right. Well, that I think you have to say that's a gray area. I mean, it would in some. You're right. You had provided that hypothetical of the Russian involvement in Canada and so forth. Probably we would just go to war. I think that just my guess is that Putin's going to try to avoid that at all costs, a direct war with Russia. But I think some things are going to change, and actually we've already seen evidence of this. Up until very recently, the Russians have been very reluctant to attack government leadership in Ukraine. You're talking about the Ukrainian government and also, high-ranking NATO officials and so forth. But if it turns out if that NATO was aware of this, or the U.S. was aware of this and did nothing, I think that policy is going to end entirely. We see recently there was a strike on the headquarters of Ukrainian military intelligence. The building that they were using was completely destroyed. It was done by a Zircon hypersonic missile. And that's important because unlike the Kinjal hypersonic missile, it does not need to be launched from the air. It's the Kinjal, they travel at about the same speed, but since the Kinjal is launched by a certain kinds of Russian aircraft, that gives warning to NATO and to the Ukrainians. These aircraft in the air, actually whenever they take off, alarms are issued, or all throughout Ukraine, because there's a chance of they realize there's a high chance of a Kinjal attack, and that gives people time to find cover. You say, we don't know where the missile's coming, where what its target is, but it could be me, it could be my headquarters. So let's get in the basement, let's get into the bunker, whatever. But the Zircon is actually launched from the sea. It can be launched from a submarine, and therefore there's no warning. It only takes, I was looking at a map just last night. It only takes something like 3.5 minutes for it to travel from Crimea to Kiev. Then even the westernmost portion of Ukraine is within 6 minutes or 5.5 minutes of this missile. So it's like when you become aware that it's heading towards you, it's too late. And that's what happened. I think it was in Kiev that this is what people reported there, is that, okay, the air raid sirens went off, and then 10 seconds later, 3 targets were hit. There were 2 Patriot batteries and this intelligence headquarters. So 10 seconds doesn't give them enough time to hide. And so anyway, they may have, we don't even know if they got Danilov or some of these other, high-ranking military intelligence officials in Ukraine. But that shows, I think, a definite kind of escalation. Yeah,
the gloves are off kind of message.
Right.
So this is the first time a Zircon missile has been used in this war?
Not the first time. I think there was once, maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and I think that was more of a test run. But I think it may be the first time that it's been used, well, certainly to such deadly effect. And then, this is not confirmed, it's just one report, but I saw that at the town that's to the west of Bakhmut, strategic town called Chasov Yar, that a missile, I think it was an Iskander, destroyed a bunker where a high-ranking Polish and U.S. NATO officers were. And again, this is not confirmed, but we'll find out. So this may again also say that, okay, we're going to start hunting these guys down. If you're on Ukrainian territory before, we were trying to, avoid things getting too hot, but you guys have not been respecting our red line, so we're not going to respect yours.
Yeah, well, it's crazy that we're even there, that there are U.S. and NATO officials on the ground, they're directing it. And it just, right. We say it's a proxy war, but can we even really say that? I mean, it seems like we're not sending troops directly, but we are sending military personnel. Maybe they're not directly manning the tanks or anything, but we put the guys in the tanks, we give them the tanks, we train them, we're directing them. It feels like it's such a dangerous game, and we seem to be so amateurish at it. Putin said that we will go after whoever was behind this, no matter who they are, not just saying that if they're Ukrainians. So, this is an escalation. We're turning up the heat, or Putin's going to be turning up the heat. Russia will. Are we looking at have we moved the dial, the doomsday clock, closer to midnight?
Oh, well, you certainly have. I mean, it is a very dangerous situation, and it's becoming more dangerous, by the day. It's, one thing, like during the Cold War, there were proxy wars, but one thing is that there was never any, for example, we supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. We were in Pakistan, supplying them with weapons and so forth. But, one thing, one red line that was never crossed, by either side is you're never complicit or any way involved in some attack on the homeland of the enemy.
Right. I mean,
or I shouldn't even say the enemy, of your rival.
Right. Let's say.
But that seems to be broken. We had those tapes of the German generals talking openly about doing that. Right. And then it's just clear that, again, these are, U.S. weapons that are being used to shell Belgorod and so forth. And then it turns out, as again these German generals admitted, that there are a lot of they have to be involved in the launching, the launch preparation and so on for these missiles, because it's very, very complicated. And so, they can't depend on the Ukrainians to do it by themselves. And they said, there are people with American accents, doing similar things throughout Ukraine. So it shows that, we have crossed that red line. And, up until very recently, the Russians had not responded, but now it looks like that they will, and especially after this attack.
Right. I mean, even if, let's say, this attack, we can't tie it to Ukraine, even though increasingly looks like it is Ukraine. You can even see, we've been strategizing and helping the Ukrainians attempt to invade Russia. In the Belgorod region, right before the election, there was a big incursion attempt to roll into Russia with our backing, with our weapons, with
Bradley fighting vehicles, right? Infantry fighting vehicles, sure.
Right. So I feel like we're just pushing we're poking the bear more and more. And is it going to wake up and smack us? And
well, it's very, very dangerous. Again, in a way, we're just kind of relying on we're relying on the sanity, the cool mind of, we'll say, of Vladimir Putin. I think this is a problem. Is that actually, I saw this long before the war broke out. It's just that again and again, like the Russians have been issuing warnings. Again, like the eastward expansion of NATO, for example. And we just ignored them. They warned against it, we ignored them. Warned against one thing after another, and we ignored them. So I think on the Western side, this was just shown as weakness. We can push the Russians around. They won't fight back because they can't fight back. And I think the first sign that wasn't true is after crossing many red lines. Of course, the war broke out. The special military operation was launched in February of 2022. I mean, this was after many red lines had been crossed. And I think we're seeing the same thing. It's just like during this war, these were even our own red lines. Oh, we better not send F-16s. Well, we better not send tanks. We end up sending everything. But hey, the Russians didn't do anything. This was what again, like Macron was saying. And that's why how he can justify sending troops, French troops into Ukraine.
How likely do you think that is? There's been this talk of Macron sending in 2,000 French troops with, a contingency of up to 60,000. I've been hearing something about that, but...
Right. Well, I think he really intends to do it. It kind of comes down to, he's already had to walk back, some of his statements, but he clearly is still committed to this idea. I think he's, other Western European leaders have told him privately and publicly, no, we're not doing this. Let's not do this. If he gets that message firm enough, you'd hope that he realize, he'd understand that he can't do it. But again, there just seems the fact that he's talking about it, that he remains committed to it, suggests that he doesn't really understand the fire that he's playing with. And again, he's making the mistake that the West has made again and again of just assuming that Russian failure to respond to Western provocations is somehow proof of Russian weakness. And we can assume that, they're bluffing. No, they give warnings, but then at some point they act. And, you better believe it. I'm confident that the Russians would, especially after this horrible attack, and especially after these infiltrate or these incursions into Belgorod and Kursk, that apparently the French Foreign Legion was very much involved in. There was, it was American equipment. From what I've heard, it was actually French advisors, French instructors, French were involved in the planning of these incursions. After this, there's I find it almost inconceivable that Putin would not actually attack French troops or any other, NATO member troops that might be sent to Ukraine.
And you think that would be a tripwire for drawing in the rest of NATO?
We don't know. That's the thing, is that it just becomes very scary. Maybe at that point, Russia calls the West bluff. That's what you kind of hope. It's just that they say, "Oh wow, this is real. Hey, let's get out of here."
It seems so crazy because you say we want to send. France sends 2,000 troops.
Right.
There's basically no air defense left in Ukraine. Right. Russia will just be 2,000 dead Frenchmen. Right. That's what they're doing, right? What can they actually do?
Right.
There's not really a line anymore.
Yeah.
It's just retreat, and it's just drones and hypersonic missiles and bunker buster glide bombs dropping down on them with nothing that can stop it. So what is the plan? Surely somebody's telling them, like, okay, we send 2,000 people there, they'll just come back in body bags.
Right.
Is there something?
I'm sure somebody is telling them. Again, it wasn't too long ago. It was in that French publication, Marianne. There was some high-ranking military official in France that described, the real situation in Russia, which is very much as you're describing it now. But he may just choose not to hear, and maybe there are others who are, toadies around him that are just telling him what he wants to hear. And it just seems to be a kind of a long, let's say there's this tendency among the West, maybe it's just from a result of decades of prosperity, of being number one, is that you just really you lose your healthy sense of fear, that everybody should have. You just stop thinking that anything real can happen. You live in this make-believe world. And you don't really think, it's just clear to me that on so many levels, the NATO just hasn't really thought through any of this. They just kind of assume we're NATO, we can start around, we can do this, we'll send our super tanks or whatever, and then the Russians will just turn tail and they'll flee. And it didn't happen. So there's a little bit of, some are waking up, but it seems like many are still just deep within that fantasy of Western primacy, just that supremacy. And Macron seems to believe it. He just, doesn't have a plan. It's just that we just go there, and they won't dare.
Right.
I said, but what if they do dare? Don't you have a contingency plan? I doubt that he really does.
The idea that 2,000 Frenchmen are going to scare Russia is absurd.
Right.
So is it too crazy to think that maybe that the idea is that they're going to basically send these Frenchmen as cannon fodder, knowing that they will get blown up, and it would be some type of tripwire to help draw in the rest of NATO to commit more and really turn this into a horrible, full-scale European war?
Yeah, right. I don't know how
what's
much
the
they're
logic?
even.
Why 2,000 troops? What do they think they're going to do? Is the
right? It's symbolic, but it's just sort of like, again, it's just like if you really take yourself too seriously, you just think, I just need to show up. It's just that, and they won't dare. That's, I guess they still imagine that the Russia of today is something like the Russia of the 1990s, that they really could kick around, and they did kick around, and they got used to it, and they just they don't understand that it's just not true anymore. They want to say, this one Putin guy, he's just kind of acting out. And, if we get rid of him, we'll just be back to where we were, and we can, Russia will no longer be a threat. And he's got to be bluffing because, we're NATO.
Right.
He's Russia. If it actually happens, if they send him and they get, and many of those soldiers are killed, then, that's going to be a very scary moment. And we just, either it's the moment where maybe the big, this illusion is that the West has shattered. That they wake up from this dream, and they develop a healthy sense of fear and respect, and we, that's what you could hope for. Is just say, okay, wait a second. This is real. We're not prepared to fight with Russia. We don't want to fight with Russia. it's time to talk. We've been listening to these crazies. Let's kick them out and start over. I don't know if there's enough sensible people in in these various administrations to do that. Or, maybe some of these people, again, they're politicians and they're very concerned with their own political survival. And maybe they'll realize just how deeply unpopular, we hope, that war with Russia is, and how it's going to be political suicide. And that maybe is what will cause them to make a 180.
Well, has there been any real attempts at diplomacy? I feel like the only way to end this is Western nations need to come to grips with reality and say we need to start talking. That doesn't seem like there's really been any attempt. I don't even know if we're capable of. And it's so crazy because every day that we don't engage in talks, the Ukrainian position just gets weaker. Right. The Western position gets weaker. We see that. We had so many opportunities to end this war, especially in the very beginning, to prevent it.
Right.
But we just are dead set, and it seems like nobody is willing to talk. Right. I mean, the only people that seem to be able to talk to Putin or like Erdogan or Orban.
Right.
But that's about it. And they're viewed as these terrible people because they would even dare communicate with him.
Right.
So the only off-ramp I see is diplomacy. But do you see any signs of that happening? Are we somebody going to pick up the phone and talk to Putin and say, hey, let's hash this out?
That's the thing. You don't see any signs of that happening right now. And so you just hope that there is, you just hope that, I'm just hoping against hope. I'm not seeing any sanity or, any realism in, among Western leaders, but you just hope that they really aren't completely insane, that at some point they're going to say, they'll just wake up. It's like waking up from a dream and say, this is not working. We're in really deep trouble. Let's pick up the phone. I mean, that's all I can, but that's going to be a scary moment. I don't know if they're capable of doing it. I'm just hoping. That's all I can say is just a hope that they can, that some of them will wake up.
Right. I wonder how these people go to sleep at night. Will they just wait until every single Ukrainian man is dead? I mean, it's
obviously they don't think about it. I mean, it's just like, I guess it was that Lindsey Graham was recently in Kiev and urging, the Ukrainian government to conscript more men. You need more men. And, meanwhile, these poor people, I really feel for the average Ukrainian man. They're they're dying trying to swim across the river into like Moldova or Romania.
Right. I mean, millions of Ukrainian men have fled the country, and the ones remaining are trying. Ukraine is not able to conscript and mobilize.
Right. Yeah,
so even the Ukrainians themselves don't want to fight. They can't fight. So why do these foreign Western leaders think that we should fight?
Right.
The Ukrainians don't even want this.
Right. I mean, it's just beyond absurd. Exactly. I mean, if it's really a matter of life and death for Ukraine, it's an existential struggle, then of course, you would think that those, I don't know exactly how many, men of military age. Of course, military age could be up to 60 or something.
Right. 16 to 65, you're going to the front.
Hundreds of thousands. Maybe millions in Western Europe.
Right. They won't go back. They don't want to fight.
Yeah. So I mean, but if it was an existential struggle, why aren't they streaming back? Why aren't they fighting? And then why are you talking about sending your own people? It is. I mean, right there, that ought to be just incontrovertible proof that
this war is over.
Yeah, it's over, and that you should not be involved. I mean, if the Ukrainians themselves are doing everything they can to avoid being conscripted, what are you doing? What do you think? You think your French soldiers are gonna put up a real fight?
I don't understand the game that we're playing, because like you said, should be political suicide for most leaders. Why are they so gung-ho? They have to come with terms. I'm sure if there's any political candidate that is in Western Europe that is operating on a more peace platform, I'm sure it would be more popular than this idea of wanting to. Nobody, like we said, the Ukrainians don't even want to go with war with Russia. I'm sure the Germans and the Dutch, you have a few crazies that maybe, but nobody wants
Right.
to
Well, I think I saw a
over it.
recent poll. I mean, that like how many people in these different countries would be willing to fight to defend their country, and in Germany it was something like 18%. They were talking about Germany,
Right.
And so how many of them are actually going to go fight for Ukraine?
Hey, it's got to be
Right.
1%, something like this.
Right. I mean, it's just
So
yeah.
well, I don't understand why can't. Surely everybody understands that this is bad, and the sooner that somebody takes the realistic path and says like,
well,
look,
I guess the thing is just they've really painted themselves into a corner. It's just that they've spent the last the last several years, even decades, demonizing the Russian government and Vladimir Putin in particular, and during the last couple of years, describing this as an existential struggle. Sometimes they use the very words, for NATO and for the West, implying, or something more than implying, saying directly that if Ukraine is defeated, they're coming for us next. They say all this. It's maybe they really believe it, and it's hard to turn around and say, oh, never mind, let's do something different. They've spent all their time demonizing people that have favored diplomacy. Everybody who has pushed for talks with Putin has been described as a Putin puppet. It's just basically a traitor, and these people have been deplatformed, have been silenced. And they've been doing that. It's this groupthink and this hysteria that has a real hold on them, and it's just not going to go away. I think the only way that it might eventually, they might be released from its grip is if they get a real, slap in the face. Like if, for example, French troops, large numbers of them are killed. Maybe at that point, it's just where they send, again, where they wake up and where they just have to go and make the 180 that they have to make. But it's just very hard for these people to do that otherwise.
Right. Yeah. There's this. It seems like we have no respect for our adversary. No willingness to kind of understand their capabilities and what the world is like right now, what is actually happening in Ukraine, and to, like we said before, during the Cold War, there were always sort of rules established that were respected, and there was always communication. There was a healthy respect. Right. We don't have that, even though it's so clear that this is not going to...
That's just hope that somehow that's going to be reestablished.
Just yesterday, I think, it was just yesterday that Biden was, on television calling Putin a butcher. It's just such poor statesmanship. Right. It's like you don't do that. He calls Xi a dictator the day after he's supposedly smooths everything over China. It just boggles my mind is how incompetent we seem to be at diplomacy. Right. Victoria Nuland, nasty surprises, Nord Stream, Biden butcher, Xi dictator. It's like, even if you believe this, you have to realize that these aren't just little. Maybe we're too used to bullying people around in the Middle East that we don't understand that China and Russia are not like this. We can't just push them around and call people these names and just ignore them. Right.
I think even like during the most tense parts of the Cold War, there wasn't that kind of name calling. In fact, I think it was understood when tensions rose that you should not be calling, your opponent these kind of names. It shows that it's a lack of professionalism, and it shows that they lack that respect. They don't really have a grip on reality, and you just hope against hope that they will develop it. They will learn it somehow.
That's our only hope, right? That's our only hope to avoid World War III. We either keep going down this path and keep escalating and keep committing more and crossing more red lines. Right. And Russia just will keep going. It will, in my opinion, it's going to end either in a nuclear war, the World War III, end of the world. I think it's unlikely. I really do, but it's a possibility. Right. Or what I think is more likely is we're going to see civil unrest within these Western nations that will be like, look, once it starts to get to that point where there's conscription, where we're saying we have to fight dead Frenchmen in Ukraine, people be like, the people will just be like, this is enough. I pray that's
Right.
That's the path to take over. I mean,
it might actually be revolution rather than a change. These people just may not be capable of learning. I mean, so far, they don't show any kind of capability of learning.
Right. The clearest solution is to start talking to Russia, start talking to Putin, negotiate, try to end this and end the bloodshed as quickly as possible. But it seems like we're incapable of that. Maybe we can become capable when things get too unruly within our own nations, if there's unrest, and we start to commit troops, and we see that's not going well.
Right. Yeah, you think about, again, we were able to negotiate with Chairman Mao. Here's this
ping pong diplomacy.
Yeah, right. I mean, we could do it, and this was just really. In the immediate aftermath of the Cultural Revolution, and China was just a deeply ideological nation. It was a radical communist a country run by a radical communist party that opposed everything that we believed in. But we had the sense, understood that it was in our interests, and really in the interest of the world, to talk to them.
Yeah, we had real diplomats back then.
Yeah.
Now it seems like we have this idea that we can just say whatever we want, do anything we want with impunity, and we're still operating under that, in that framework, and it's not working.
Yeah, I imagine maybe it's kind of intoxicating when you think that you're the master of the universe. It's hard to let go of that. Maybe that's what's happening at some level, but they're going to have to.
Okay, well, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I don't know. All I can say, I don't know. Like we've kind of painted different scenarios. There's different. It depends on the outcome of this investigation in part. What measures that the Russian government takes, how the West reacts, and these are all unknowns. But it's a scary time. I'm nervous. I mean, I'm truly anxious about this. I hope things settle down, and then, but there doesn't look like any prospect of that. Not in the short term, anyway.
Yeah, you lived through the Cold War. Do you feel like the situation we're in now is more dangerous?
Yeah, almost definitely. I mean, it's just that. Like during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think I was 6 months old or something like that. I can't remember. I don't even know exactly. It was around the time I was born, we'll just say. But I do remember like the 70s and the 80s. I remember détente. I remember negotiations. I remember deals, being made between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. I remember, Gorbachev and Reagan meeting. There was Reagan did call the Soviet Union the evil empire, but that's about as far as he went. But he was also, for example, he seemed to be much more of a realist. He never crossed any of those Cold War red lines. And when he made a mistake, by sending soldiers into Lebanon, instead of doubling down on it, he just pulled them out. And then just hope that, it just seems like the quality of leadership. I'm not a real big Reagan fan or anything, but I think as somebody else was pointing out, he wasn't particularly smart, but he had good advisors, and that makes all the difference. So the problem with a lot of these Western leaders, they're not, first of all, they themselves are quite ignorant. They're just purely political creatures. And, when they get into office, they're surrounded by people that often really are equally political themselves. They've now, we have political animals that not people that really are there because of competency, because they understand the other side. I think it's a much more dangerous situation, and the main reason is there's just this lack of respect. There was a real fear, when I remember in the 80s, a real fear of nuclear war, and so people, they wanted the U.S. government to be cautious.
Right. I was going to say that, what's scariest for me right now is that back then, like you're saying, in the Cold War, that people were afraid of nuclear war. There were movies about it. It was clearly people had in school. You had these like
drills,
nuclear drills.
Yeah, that was before my time, or at least it certainly didn't happen at my school. But yeah, in the 50s and I think early 60s, they were pretty common. But there certainly was a fear of nuclear war in the 70s and 80s, especially.
Right, but in where we're living now, I feel like most of the Western world, or at least here in America, people don't have that fear. People aren't aware how close we are to something terrible, and how we keep on moving. And that's what scares me. Is that we don't. The population within the United States and most of Western Europe don't have a clear picture of what's going on. Don't realize that we're playing with fire. And I hope people will wake up, and maybe, slowly they are. I feel like, people
at the edges anyway.
And I hope shows like this will help as well a bit.
Well, I do too.
Okay, well, I think this is a good place to end it, Dad.
Sure.
Scary times. Okay, thank you.